Hello everybody and welcome back to another modelled writing video. If you've been with us before, then you'll know how these videos work, but if you are new here, welcome, and today we are going to look at two task 1 questions. So task 1 are the shorter essay style questions, part of the writing element of the exam, and you have 20 minutes to answer this question, and you're expected to write a minimum of 150 words. So that is what we're going to look at today. We'll have two different pieces of data, and I'll show you how to plan for them, organize your thoughts, and then do the write-up as if we were in the exam itself. So, with that being said, let's get started and we'll have a look at our first task. Okay, so our first task is going to look at a bar graph. Now, bar graphs are a very common type of chart or graph that can come up in the exam. They could be on their own, they could be involved with multiple charts, there could be more than one. So very much something to be aware of and familiar with. Okay, the question itself, the task. The graph shows estimated oil production capacity for several Gulf countries between 1990 and 2010. Summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. Okay, so we're being told what to do here. We need to select and report the main features, only the main features, not every single part of the task. That's something you'll be assessed on. Your ability to cherry pick information if you like, and also make comparisons where relevant. So again, we're not making comparisons left, right, and centre, just when we feel that they are appropriate, where things are interesting, striking, important, relevant, all of these words. Okay, so what are we, let's just look at the question again. It's a bar chart about estimated oil production capacity, right, for several countries over the course of 20 years here. Okay, let's have a look. Right, so here's the bar chart itself. Along the y-axis, we have the countries: Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and UAE. And these are the 4 years, 1990 to 2010, with we've got 10 years there, then 5 years from 2010 to 2000 to 2010. Okay, and along the, sorry, this was the x-axis, along the y-axis up here, millions of barrels per day. Okay, so that's what we're looking at. Right, so it's our job now to think about groupings, and logical groups are really important for task 1. We want to show the examiner that we can link information together and present our data in an organised way. Present our findings, sorry, in an organised way. Right, so for this, there's a few different routes you can go down. You could group countries together, perhaps. You could group the amount of oil in millions of barrels, or you could group the years. So for this one, I might keep it really simple and group the years and talk about 1990 to 2000 and 2000 and 2005 and 2010. So I'll just split it up into the two groups over the 4 years that are described here. Okay, initial thoughts then for our overview. We have, wow, Saudi Arabia is, for all years, the predicted or the rough estimation of oil production was higher than any other country. So we're going to touch upon Saudi Arabia oil production was significantly higher. significantly higher than any other country. That's what we're going to go down there, that route down. Okay, so we've got our groupings, we've got our overview. Now I think we can go to our write-up itself, and we have our question here. Oh, we have our this one question. We have our useful words, synonyms that will help us interchange our language so that we're not repeating ourselves too much. That's another criteria. And of course, we've got our bar chart here. So what is the first thing that we need to do? We need to paraphrase this sentence here. The graph shows estimated oil production capacity for several Gulf countries between 1990 and 2010. Okay, so paraphrasing is a really important skill for IELTS in both task 1 and task 2. So something to make sure that you're confident in. So we can be more specific and we could say the bar chart displays approximate. Oil is hard to maybe the approximate amount of oil produced by countries within the Gulf region between 1990 and 2010. Okay, let's read this back. The bar chart displays the appropriate amount of oil produced by countries within the Gulf region between 1990 and 2010. Okay, so that is our opening paragraph. We've paraphrased the task here. So now what do we need to do? Well, we can go into our overview then. And we're going to talk about how Saudi Arabia's production is significantly higher than the other countries. And we can use a nice phrase like in general, or maybe at first glance. That's a nice one. At first glance, Saudi Arabia's figures are significantly higher than any other countries, than any other nations, especially in the year, say 2010. 2010. At first glance, Saudi Arabia's figures are significantly higher. Let's check the tense actually, because this is all in the past, so we're significantly higher than any other nations, especially in the year 2010. Okay then, so we've got our paraphrased opener here, and then our second paragraph is our overview. Notice that we haven't used any specific, we've said the year 2010, but we haven't gone into real specific detail about the chart. So that's now to come, because we get to dive into our two groups now, and this is where we'll pull information from the chart itself, and we'll report back, make comparisons as well. Alrighty, so our first group is 1990 and 2000. Okay, so we can pick, we've already mentioned Saudi Arabia in the overview, so we can pick maybe a few points for 1990 and a few points for 2000. Okay, so in 1990, Saudi Arabia was producing the highest amount of oil. And then let's put, so we've got 2 million increments here. So 8 to 10 million. This may be 8.5. So roughly 8.5 million barrels per day. Okay, so we've touched on Saudi, and then we could touch on, there's another, well, the UAE and Iraq are very similar, just above 2 million. The rest, or the other countries, they were all below, 4 million. All had levels of below 4 million. Notably, the UAE and Iraq had very similar statistics, around the 2 million mark. Okay, so you can see how sometimes we can group them together as well. It's quite nice. You can sort of say, without being specific, but the other countries had under 4 million, and then you can be specific. So there are ways to elaborate and say things in a slightly different format, which is quite nice as well. Okay, so that's 1990. Should we go into 2000? So most of the countries increased their oil production in 2000, apart from the UAE. 2000, most of the nations or most areas increased production, except for UAE, which plateaued. That's a good word. Stayed the same. Plateaued. Okay, let's go into detail here. Well, for Qatar, actually, it was their highest year. For Qatar, this was the largest, or was the most productive year. Most productive year at, so nearly 1 million. 1 million barrels. And then maybe we could do another line of just noting what else is happening. So UAE, Qatar, Iran, Iraq, and Kuwait follow the same trend actually. Oh, and Saudi Arabia. We could talk about how they have similar they're all in a similar range to each other. Kuwait sees quite a big jump there. Yeah, let's mention Kuwait. Kuwait witnessed a fairly significant climb this year to reach maybe 2.5, to reach roughly 2.5 million barrels per day. Okay, let's read this back and see how this is sounding. In 1990, Saudi Arabia was producing the highest amount of oil, roughly 8.5 million barrels per day. The other countries all had levels of below 4 million. Notably, the UAE and Iraq had very similar statistics, around the 2 million mark. In 2000, most areas increased production, except for UAE, which plateaued. For Qatar, this was the most productive year at nearly 1 million barrels. Kuwait witnessed a fairly significant climb this year to reach roughly 2.5 million barrels per day. Okay, let's add a nice word here additionally. So we're going back, we are editing, making sure everything's okay. Any mistakes, spelling's a big one. Anything we can add, like a nice linking word. So these are all things that we're checking for as we're going along. Okay then, so we've done 1990, we've done 2000. So now we can go into the last 2 years, 2005 and 2010. So, what's happening here? We've got Iran and Iraq are following a very, very gradual increase here. Saudi, on the other hand, has increased by nearly 2 million. So it was around the 9.5 and now it's around, the 13. So actually, yes, significant increase there. UAE has not plateaued, it's increased. We could talk about these 3 countries following a very similar trend here. So in 2005, 3 countries are continuing following a very similar trend. Iran, Iraq, and Kuwait. Gradually, very gradually, grew each year. And this year was no different. Producing, now we can do respectively. So Iran was 4 million, producing 4 million. Iraq, 3 million. And maybe, and approximately 2.5 million respectively. Okay, so respectively is a nice way of listing data. So you mention the variables, so in this case countries, and then you can follow them in the order with the data that matches them. So that's a nice way of creating some variation and reporting back, I think. Okay, so we've mentioned these 3, and we could just mention Saudi Arabia having a big climb there. Saudi Arabia saw the most dramatic surge in this year, 12.5, reaching 12.5 million barrels per day. So we don't always have to say barrels per day, but here and there I think it's quite nice. Okay then, 2010. So let's talk about how for most countries this was, I think we've mentioned this. This was their highest year. 2010, most places were experiencing their most profitable year. The UAE nearly rose to 4 million. nearly rose to 4 million, while actually these 4 countries were around the 4 million mark as well. While Saudi Arabia saw the highest figure at 14.5 million. We could add a line about Kuwait, Qatar, maybe if you have time. Qatar, on the other hand, remained below $1 million in this year and throughout the past 20 years. Let's read this back and see how it's sounding. In 2005, 3 countries were continuing to follow, tense here, were continuing to follow a very similar trend. Iran, Iraq, and Kuwait gradually grew each year, and this year was no different, producing 4 million, 3 million, and approximately 2.5 million respectively. Saudi Arabia saw the most dramatic surge in this year, reaching 12.5 million barrels per day. In 2010, most places were experiencing their most profitable year. The UAE nearly rose to 4 million, while Saudi saw the highest figure at 14.5 million. Qatar, on the other hand, remained below 1 million in this year and throughout the past 20 years. Okay then, so I think we can count the words for this one and see how we're doing. Okay, so that comes to a total of 222 words. 3 twos there. So that's quite a good amount to aim for. And of course, if you don't have the time to write this much, then you can take away a few points from each paragraph, but still following the structure here, which is very important. So hopefully you can see how we've approached that. We tried to make it as simple as possible, fairly straightforward, this one. So there we go. That's our first task of today. Now we can go into our second one, and this is actually, in fact, a bar chart again. So if you are looking to practice bar charts today, then you've definitely come to the right place. We will be focusing on that for this video. Okay, the question. The graph below shows the different modes of transport used to travel to and from work in one European city in 1960, 1980, and 2000. Write a report for a university lecturer describing the information below. Okay, so we've got slightly different phrasing here. They want us to write a report for a lecturer. However, even though it's different, we're going to approach it in exactly the same way. So we're going to pull the most relevant information. We're going to make comparisons where it's relevant, and also we will summarize the information as well. So nothing changes there. Okay, so we've got one graph to display information about modes of transport used to travel to and from work in different years, 1960, 1980, and 2000. And here it is. Here's the bar chart itself. So on the x-axis, we have modes of transport. Train, car, tube, bus. And here we have the years. This is the key. So 1960 is this dark red, 1980 a bit lighter, and 2000 is more of a pink. Then on the y-axis we have percentage of commuters up here, and it goes up to 45%. Okay, so initial thoughts. Oh, wow, bus really declines in percent. Car really increases over time. Um, Train fluctuates and tube fluctuates. So let's put our thoughts into our groups now. Um, okay, so let's have a think. We have um, train and tube. Well, train and tube are sort of jumping out to me because they're in a similar range in terms of numbers, ballpark range. So we could maybe compare the two, and they're quite similar forms of transport as well. Um, Car and bus are more diverse, so we could talk about the opposite trends there. But of course, you can group them in terms of years or perhaps percentage difference as well. This is what I'm going to do today. I think it's easier to talk about them, the different modes. Okay, so bus saw the most dramatic decrease over time, whereas bus saw the most significant car saw the most significant increase. So bus saw the most dramatic decrease, whereas car saw the most significant increase. All right then, so there we have it. Our charts, our groups, and our overview are all here. So now I think we can go to our write-up. And of course, we have our question here. We have some nice words to help us, some verbs and adverbs. And then we have our chart at the bottom here. So just like always, we need to paraphrase this sentence here. The bar chart illustrates or demonstrates the various types of ways in which individuals went traveled to work and home, or traveled to work and back in a city during the years 1960, 1980, and 2000. Okay, let's read this back. The bar chart demonstrates the various types of ways in which individuals travelled to work and back in a city during the years 1960, 1980, and 2000. Okay, I think that's good. So now we can go into our overview. So we could talk about the most significant decrease in percentage over time was seen with buses, with the bus category, whereas the car group or the car figure dramatically increased. Okay then, so we are just making our, or actually we could say something like in general. Nice way to open it up. So this is for our sweeping statement. We don't want to take any specific detail from the chart itself. We just want to be broad and sweeping with our overview there. Okay, so let's go into our first group, and we're looking at car and bus actually. Okay, so start with, why don't we start with car? We could say something like commuters or individuals or people. Commuters using cars was at its lowest figure. Its lowest figure in 1960. So these are increments of 5, so about 5, 6, 7, totaling 7%. This sharply rose, and we're using these words here, sharply rose to 23%. We could say in 1980 and again in 2000, where 38, where the proportion was 38%. Okay, so we're talking about cars firstly. So commuters using cars was at its lowest figure in 1960, totaling 7%. This sharply rose to in 1980 and again in 2000, where the proportion was where the share was 38%. Okay, then, so that's cars. Now we can talk about buses. So buses, on the other hand, saw or witnessed the opposite phenomenon. 1960 was its highest year at maybe 39%. Okay, then what happened? This quickly declined year upon year to land at 15% in 2000. Okay, so let's read this back and maybe we can add something here. Commuters using cars was at its lowest figure in 1960, totaling 7%. This sharply rose in 1980 and again in 2000, where the share was 38%. Buses, on the other hand, witnessed the opposite phenomenon. 1960 was this group's maybe highest year at 39%. It's quickly declined year upon year. We could add 1980 maybe. 1980. In 1980, this fell to 27%. And eventually, and the last year saw it land at 15% in 2000. In 1980, this fell to 27%, and the last year, we could say, and eventually it landed at 15% in 2000. Okay, So we are commenting on cars and buses there. I think that's a good start. So now perhaps we can go into our second group, which is going to look at trains and tubes. Okay, so trains and tubes, let's compare first. Um, Maybe in contrast. In contrast, trains and tubes did not follow a pattern as such. They fluctuated throughout the years. Fluctuated throughout the years. Okay, so what's happening with trains? Is there anything that's trains in 1960 and then increased and then decreased? Tubes started out strong in 1960, decreased and then increased. So we can talk about in 1960, tubes were at their most popular at 28%. Trains, meanwhile, were experiencing the lowest level of users at 15, 16, 19%. Okay, so the opposite was happening with trains, which meanwhile were experiencing the lowest level of users at 19%. Okay, so let's talk about trains rise, tubes fall, and then 2000. So trains, however, saw a surge in 1980. The highest statistic for this group 26, 27%. Then tubes had a drop and then they climbed back up. So we can talk about after a steady drop in 1980, tubes then grew 20 years later to reach a quarter of total commuters, or to encompass maybe commuters. Trains were not too far behind. 22, ending 2000 with 22%. Okay, so let's read this back, this paragraph here. In contrast, trains and tubes did not follow a pattern as such. They fluctuated throughout the years. In 1960, tubes were at their most popular at 28%. The opposite was happening with trains, which meanwhile were experiencing the lowest level of users at 19%. Trains, however, saw a surge in 1980, the highest statistic for this group, 27%. After a steady drop in 1980, tubes then grew 20 years later to encompass a quarter of all total commuters, maybe. Trains were not too far behind, ending 2000 with 22%. Okay, so we've gone back, we've edited, made sure everything sounds okay here. So I think we can count the words and see how we're doing. Okay, so that takes us to 199 words, so just under the 200 mark there. But you can see how we've picked the relevant information, we've reported back, and we've throughout done, we've not always just stated the information, but you can use brackets, you can talk about the differences, you can use variety in how you relay the information back, which I think is quite nice as well. Hopefully that's helped today. So we've looked at 2 bar charts today. So if you are wanting to become more confident with bar charts, then today's video is definitely for you. They're a very common type of chart that can come up. So I would recommend becoming familiar with them and making sure that you're happy before you sit the exam with bar charts. Amongst all the other ones. But let us know if you've got any comments or questions. We love to hear from you, and we hope that's been helpful today. We've got plenty of other videos if you want to go and check those out, and we'll see you next time.